has the fighting across the front line stepped up to a whole nother level? And is the U.S. providing Ukraine with the ultimate weapon to take out Russian armor? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. It's September 7th, 2023. This is your daily Ukraine update. Let's get into it. Okay, first, taking a look at the control map, right? We have a couple of changes, notably first outside Klachivka. You can see Russian forces being forced out of this windbreak here to the south of the town of Klachivka itself. This is, again, going to put a lot of pressure on the remaining Russian air assault forces in this region, right? They're pretty much pinned here. They are going to have a hard time withdrawing. Again, when they withdraw, it'll probably be to this windbreak rail line here. They're going to, try to use this as a final defensive line. You can see how strong it would be right on the backside of Andriivka. They've got this obstacle to their back, which can be a blessing and a curse, right? Because when you have these sort of water formations, right, you can't withdraw. It makes it hard if you get pushed out of this twin windbreak that you're kind of seeing that's out here. It means that as you withdraw, your forces have to cross a river, and then if you want to counterattack, you've got to recross it. But in turn, if the Ukrainian forces need to push through this, well, they're going to have their work cut out for them as well, since there'll be only narrow, predictable channels where the Russians will expect them to cross. So these rivers are a blessing and a curse, but for right now, they probably, to the Russian forces trying to defend, feel a little bit like a curse, right? So I would expect to see the Russian final withdrawal from Klachivka in the next maybe week or so. You also, of course, have some, again, minor changes out here near Novodihorivka. You can see Russian forces again making a very small advance. As I've acknowledged for both Ukraine and Russian forces, this fighting in this northern front is pretty sparse. And while some of the footage coming out of it can look pretty intense, these are small units fighting over large amounts of territory. So this ebb and flow, this push and pull is to be expected. And if you want, we'll be checking out the combat videos today on combatvetnews.com. This is my site that I run. Patreon, right, gave me the boot. YouTube gave me the boot. So every time we see some of this fighting, every Tuesday and Thursday, I compile all of the viral combat videos, and we do a deep dive analysis, but it's for members only. And this is the best way to support the channel. Any one of these tiers gets you access to the members only content, which is combat footage that in some cases is so intense, I can't even show you the thumbnails. I've been demonetized for showing literally the thumbnails of my own site. So again, if you want to support what I do, this is the way to do it. And again, we're going to be checking out today some of the fighting from the Crimea Forest region. We're going to check out some of the fighting from Verbova. And we are going to get that bird's eye, or that up close and personal view of this fighting, which you can see there's not really been any updates to the Russian or Ukrainian control lines outside of Robtina, as well as really anywhere on the southern front, right? These are just standard sort of time-based metrics where if Ukraine has held territory for more than 2 weeks, they color it green. That's the only change there. Looking, though, at the combat map, notably, you're seeing Ukrainian defense forces reporting 7 hours ago that they have had additional success to the west of Verbova and south south of Robtina. So that would be along this line here, the Novoprokopivka line, as well as into Verbova. So again, if you look at some of the other reporting, you can see that most list the majority, or at least a significant portion of Verbova, as contested. And this reflects a deepening of this contested region, right? Verbova increasingly under, not Ukrainian control, but under no one's control. And as we talked about, when you look at some of the fortification networks here, you realize Verbova is kind of a strong point where the major Russian fortifications, the so-called Sotovikin line, they hinge here at Verbova. And if Ukrainian forces can get solid control of this town, it's going to give them access to the Sotovikin line to the south and to the east here. So that would in turn create real problems, again, for Russian forces operating all in this northern region, Plohoy, as well as the Russian forces trying to hold this line here outside of Solodobalka and Novoprokopivka. So again, I think control of Verbova is essential. Penetration of the two Russian defensive lines also essential in the combat effort. Looking over at War as of 18 hours ago, reporting, as we talked about, that at least a significant portion of Verbova is listed as contested, of urban Verbova proper. You can see behind here, it actually is reporting that Ukrainian forces control at least a corner of this Russian fortification here, and that they are pushing to they're on the cusp of contesting for another portion of this second line of defense. But again, if there's a lesson here that we should internalize, it's that the idea that having Ukrainian forces into this line of defenses here in a larger operational sense is very, very, very worrying for the Russian forces. You can see Russian forces deployed almost entirely forward of these lines. So if Ukraine can penetrate them and start to roll into them, you're going to see Russia have to start to make really hard decisions about keeping troops on the front line in contact with Ukrainian forces or redeploying them and suddenly having to deploy them in what used to be their rear lines, but will now look more like an east-west axis. So again, a lot of potential here, even if the warfare is still remaining very attritional. Now, what I found interesting in the news today, the U.S. announced they are sending depleted uranium rounds to Ukraine. Why are they doing so? What exactly do they do? Well, the answer is pretty simple. You can see here is a U.S. soldier preparing to train presumably Ukrainian troops on the Abrams. And the Abrams is a top tier main battle tank. Difficult to maintain, but really an excellent main battle tank. But what makes it even more excellent is when you can load them with depleted uranium rounds. I'm going to try to find a graphic here that depicted what a depleted uranium round does. Let's see if we can find it. I think Kiev Post actually had a pretty good diagram. Here we go. Perfect. So this is what makes depleted uranium rounds so sought after. You can see it looks like a standard Sabo round, right? Has a windshield tip, right? What they call a burlette. And this is, of course, going to be pushed, and it's meant to penetrate heavy armor, right? Cut through it and enter the main area of the tank, right? And the thing that enables it, you can see here, is that what they've created is basically a very fast-moving arrow. But this tip, the arrowhead, is not what you would expect. It's actually, this is a depleted uranium. It's extremely dense, denser than lead, on par with like tungsten. And that means that when it comes in contact with something like steel from the armor plating of a tank, that it's able to push through, and even though they're making contact at really high speeds, actually liquefying the armor in some places, the depleted uranium is going to retain its shape more as instead of flattening out as it contacts the armor, it's going to maintain a level of penetration that's going to enable it to get inside the tank. And once you've broken through that armor and gotten inside the tank and you're shattering all sorts of shrapnel into the tank itself, it's a devastating weapon. And so devastating, actually, that there was a homemade version of this in Iraq and Afghanistan that was called an EFP. And it relied on a copper plate to achieve the same effect, to form a liquid metal jacket that broke through heavy armor. But you can imagine, right, if you can do that with copper, you can imagine what a depleted uranium round will do to Russian armor. right? And it's extremely cheap for the U.S. because depleted uranium is, well, inert, right? It's not highly radioactive. Now, obviously, there's been some credible studies in the U.S. where there was a large amount of depleted uranium rounds used in the Gulf War that they may have long-term health effects. But ultimately, the elected Ukrainian government has weighed the downsides and upsides of DU rounds, and the U.S. has offered them. Ukraine has accepted them, right? It's way different if they were to throw, if they were to use depleted uranium rounds on like Russian civilians, that would be kind of messed up. But the fact is that these are safe to handle in the relatively limited time and quantities that we're talking about here. And again, if the alternative is letting Russian tanks run amok on the battlefield, depleted uranium rounds are the less dangerous option for sure. Anyway, guys, that is all I had for you for today. Thank you so much to everyone. Thanks to our Colonel tier members at combatvetnews.com. Thank you to our Lieutenant tier members. And of course, thank you to all the members of combatvetnews.com. I really couldn't do this without you guys. Thank you so much, and I'll see you all in the next one. Cheers.